The parietal lobe is located posteriorly to the frontal lobe, and that region of the brain is mostly involved in sensation. That's because it contains the primary somatosensory cortex, or the post-central gyrus. We can use those terms interchangeably in our course. And that's the place where all the sensory information is collected by sensory neurons that travel into the brain, with the exception of smell and visual information. It also contains sensory association areas. So the general pattern we see for most types of sensation is that there's a primary site where everything goes into first, and then from there it spreads out into association areas that help you to assign meaning to the information that you've collected. So for example, the primary somatosensory cortex would tell you that you were touching something, but the association areas might help you to determine that you were touching something sharp. Now, both the primary motor cortex and the primary somatosensory cortex are organized based upon something called a homunculus, which is kind of a weird word, kind of a fun word to say actually. But the homunculus basically says that the amount of real estate that different parts of the body get inside the brain is based upon their usage. So in other words, it's not based off the size of the structure as you might expect. You might think that a large structure like your stomach would take up a large amount of the primary somatosensory cortex as well. But it actually only takes up a small sliver. Structures like your hands, which are relatively small, your face, they tend to take up significantly more cortical area. This is true in both the primary motor cortex and in the primary somatosensory cortex. In the primary motor cortex, having a large area dedicated to your face allows you to produce really complex facial expressions, which throughout the course of human evolution have been really important for nonverbal communication. You can smile at your friends, you can scowl at your enemies. And similarly, in the primary somatosensory cortex, having a large area associated with your hand gives you a very sensitive sense of touch, allowing us to do things like, for example, read Braille. Now, the temporal lobe, which is the most lateral region of the cortex, is also involved in sensation to some degree, but more so in specialized senses like hearing. It's also involved in learning and memory, so I'll be talking about it a little bit later on in this unit. Your primary auditory cortex is located in the temporal lobe, and that's where all sound information comes into the cortex. This region also contains neurons that are important for language comprehension. That happens in an area known as Wernicke's area, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that momentarily. Now, the most posterior lobe of the brain is the occipital lobe. This is the region that contains the primary visual cortex and all of the visual association areas. Now, remember that all these different parts of the brain can communicate with each other. And as one example of that, we can consider the pathways involved in speech and language. Remember that Broca's area is in the frontal lobe, and it's important for speech production. I always remember this because Broca sounds like boca, which is the Spanish word for mouth. Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe is important for language comprehension. So both Broca's area and Wernicke's area in most people are found only in the left hemisphere. We call them lateralized structures present mostly on one side. And that means that they rely on commissural fibers to connect them to structures on the right hemisphere. But because of the close relationship between speech and language, there are also association fibers running between them. So, for example, we have one called the arcuate fasciculus, which is a white matter tract that connects Broca's area to Wernicke's area. Signals sent through the arcuate fasciculus allow us to produce coherent spoken language. If we were to think instead about comprehending written language, then we might be interested in another pathway called the angular gyrus, which is a collection of association fibers that connect the visual cortex to Wernicke's area. That allows you to make sense of things that you're reading. To really highlight the differences in the function between these regions, we can study different types of aphasias, or language disorders. These are usually characterized by difficulty in understanding or in producing speech. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos, and I apologize that the quality of the videos is not particularly good, but videos are kind of hard to find because it's difficult to study living brains. While we have access to a lot of cadavers, it's really difficult to use non-living brains to understand how different parts of the brain function when people are alive. So most people who are alive, though, aren't exactly lining up to have people poke and prod their cerebral cortex. So most of what we know about the brain has come from studying people that have had those ischemic injuries or traumas I was talking about before. Those will often damage a very specific region of the brain and change its function, and then we can use that to understand what that function actually is. So let's take a look.
Now tell me what this thing was with your legs last week or week before.
No good. Ache and uh,
So you can see that the man in this video is having a really hard time forming words. Although I'm not an expert in this area, this person most likely has an aphasia caused by damage to Broca's area. And that's because even though they're producing speech, it's very telegraphic. It's slow, deliberate, and you can see how frustrating it is to be able to understand language and know what you want to say, but just not be able to produce the speech.
So how are you doing today, Kent?
Okay.
Okay. Are you having pain anywhere?
No.
No? You feel pretty good in general?
Yes.
Yeah. You can understand what I'm saying to you, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you close your eyes for me? Perfect. Now tell me your name.
Good. Cause I've had. No. I've had.
Can you tell me what city we're in right now? This is Richmond. Can you say Richmond?
Yes, Richard.
Richmond. Say Richmond.
Richard.
Yeah. Okay.
In this video, we see anomia, the inability to come up with the name of everyday objects.
they're good, boom.
What's this?
The big end right there, end of the football.
End of the football?
It influenced the football right here. The cause that it comes in, see?
Yeah.
The end of it, see? Yeah. Oh, we have all of these, see?
I don't understand.
Well, it's pliable as the other, see? You don't understand it, but it products in the long thread reed comes from there. And it comes source from the country out through, see? All the under it, see, it comes up and finally come out.
In this third situation, there's no problem producing speech, but the speech that's being produced is incoherent. He doesn't appear to understand the questions that he's being asked, and he's not able to give coherent answers. Most likely, this is due to damage to Wernicke's area. And the last example that I want to show you is a conduction aphasia, which is caused by damage to the arcuate fasciculus.
This videotape, the producer asked us to count to 10. Remember that?
Yes.
Can you do that again?
Why? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Boy, to Gabby, people go. I can't.
No, that's really hard. Let me get you started.
I was stunned.
Okay. 1,
1, 2, 4, 5, 6, better send, point.
Good enough. Let's
Is
not
that
bother.
all